The agenda's election coverage this week debated what's at the center of the disengaged electorate. We parsed the politics of the Ring of Fire and examined the province's role in the governing of the Gin. The agenda's week in review begins, however, with Progressive Conservative leader Tim Hudak and his million jobs plan. If it's all about jobs, and I have seen you in the Ontario legislature get up and say, the moment I wake up from a good night's sleep, the first thing I'm thinking about is how to create jobs in Ontario. I've seen you give that speech numerous times. And yet, you made an announcement the other day which suggested that you wanted to fire 100,000 people in the broader public sector. And I'm trying to figure out how the guy who wakes up every day thinking about how to create jobs squares that position with the guy who says, I need to lay off 100,000 people.
When I talk to employers or groups like the Chamber of Commerce, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, they're a strong spokes group
okay.
for small business. You know, Stephen, I asked them, what's the most important thing we can do to give you confidence to add more men and women to your payroll? They don't say it's energy. Well, that's important. They don't say it's taxes. That's important too. Or red tape. They say we want a government that spends within its means. We want less debt on our backs. And after all, who's investing in Detroit, Michigan these days, or Greece? The first order of business, mission critical to job creation, is balancing the budget. And if anybody comes on the agenda and says they can balance the budget, eliminate a $12 billion deficit, and not touch payroll, which is more than 50 cents in a dollar, I mean, either they're naive or they think your audience is.
Well, they don't say that, but they say, just give us another year to do it. We'll take 3 years, you'll do it in 2.
Which they keep postponing year after year. And you know this at home, and your viewers do too. I mean, if you sweep something under the carpet, it doesn't go away. Often it gets worse. A number of the things that you talked about at the opening of the show, those are recommendations by the Drummond Commission. And look, from time to time, I've not been exactly the biggest fan of this government, but I'll give credit where credit's due. They did a good job. If we had implemented the Drummond Commission a couple of years ago, we'd have more jobs in our province. We'd probably have a balanced budget. So it's a matter of when do you actually take action? I've got a plan to balance the budget. I do that because I want to create more jobs in our province for young people, for people who've lost their jobs in industry and are struggling to get by in a part-time job. The other two leaders, they're focused on being popular. They'll kick this decision down the road, but if you don't address it now, the hole to climb out of is that much deeper.
Okay, but let's take a look at one of those Drummond recommendations. You say you're going to save money by allowing class sizes to go up. I don't know any parents in Ontario who want their kids in bigger classrooms. So how do you make that one sing?
There's only so many dollars that are there. And if we keep spending, and when you're spending more than you take in, you're borrowing. When you're spending, borrowing, driving up debt, that means that we have less money when we pay back that interest to go to help out special needs kids.
Okay, but you're saying to parents, you're going to have to deal with bigger classrooms, right?
That's right. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about the choices. So we have to make some decisions. I mean, do we want to have 10,000 more bureaucrats in the school boards, or do you want to help special needs kids? Are we satisfied that more than 25% of our students aren't passing basic tests when it comes to literacy, or math scores in decline? It's a matter of making choices. Choices to make sure we grow the economy, but balancing our budget, lower taxes, affordable energy, but also trade-offs in the system. So it does mean that there'll be 2 or 3 kids in an average class more. But it also means that we can keep full-day kindergarten. It means we'll have the resources to help that special needs kid. It means that we can bring in teachers who will specialize in math to turn around the declining test scores. I've made my choices. I don't think the other two leaders have made any choices at all.
I get that's your position, but one of the Drummond recommendations is to fire 9,700 education workers from that sector. Is that not to have any impact on the classroom at all?
Well, those are positions outside of the classroom. I think you remember from the Drummond recommendation, it is one that we endorsed. Let me tell you why. Again, every decision I make is focused on what's it going to do to grow our economy, provide more opportunity for Ontarians. More people are working, and again, our plan is 1 million new jobs in our province. Good steady job, you're paying steady taxes. It means we'll have the funds there then to make sure we've got that latest drug to help fight cancer. It means that Maddie Vanstone, who's been on your show, can actually get the treatment she needs instead of seeing her life deteriorate. So we've got some choices. The healthcare budget needs to increase. I gave you 2 examples why. Education, Steve, we actually have 225,000 fewer students in our schools. We spend $8.5 billion more, and our test scores are declining in mathematics. So the choice is between eliminating a lot of school board positions outside of the classroom so we can have more nurses, or a drug treatment for a young person who's 9 years old and trying to live. I know where I stand.
Bullet points. Up, down, what do we think? Million jobs plan.
Well, I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
One is, how is Mr. Hudak going to reach that target by starting out by cutting 100,000 public sector jobs? My other question is, how is he going to reach that target by cutting jobs in the education system, and including educational assistants that help our most vulnerable children? And the third is, how is he going to rip up those contracts with the green energy companies and the billions that that'll cost? So those are my three questions for Mr. Hudak.
We will go from there. Andrew Cash.
Well, I think Linwood Barkley summed it up nicely when he said, I need your vote so I can fire you. That sums up the essentially what's happening here. It's the numbers don't make sense. I mean, he's talking about 1 million jobs, but he starts off with cutting 100,000. So is he going to create 900,000, or is he going to create 100 or 1.1 million? We don't really know, but it does seem like you know, Mr. Hudak is he needs to keep his job. He needs to do whatever it takes to keep his job. I think it's a bit of a desperate move.
Michael Luba.
Well, I'm going to agree with Andrew here, but I'm going to go even a step further and say I get to page 6 of this job plan, and I see that Tim Hudak says there are 800,000 unemployed Ontarians. Well, I'm a young man, and I know how to use a computer, so I go to StatsCan, and I see that that number is actually 555,000. It seems to me like perhaps the whole platform is built on a bit of a fallacy there when you're trying to make 1 million jobs for only 555,000 unemployed Ontarians. It seems like he's reaching, and I'm not really sure why.
Ashley, as a reporter, I don't expect you to weigh in with an opinion on the thing, but where do you want to go with this?
I think it's a very bold plan, and Mr. Hudak has been saying for a long time now that that's what he's pursuing, so he's accomplished that. I think that critics will say it could be 1 million jobs through 1 million cuts. There's a lot of slashing proposed in here, and I think it depends on what Ontario voters want to see as far as the economic direction of the province, whether they buy into a school of thought that you can cut taxes and potentially cut services to grow the economy, or if they want to see the kind of government investment that has been promised by the Liberals, or perhaps some middle ground from the NDP.
John, you've been listening to the criticism. What do you say?
Well, and so I'm getting used to all the criticism, so is Tim, but I think the key thing, though, Steve, is that he has a plan. It is bold. It is something that he sees Ontario needs with respect to jobs. He's been tapping into that for the last little while, and quite frankly, everyone's talking about the fact that people do need jobs. So it is a plan. It is bold. He's going to make it happen. And I think today we saw the launch that he did with unveiling the plan, and it was a really good launch with a lot of very solid policies within that platform.
What made it a good launch in your view?
Well, a couple of things. One is that he actually had a plan. He actually had specific ideas to get to the 1 million jobs that he's talking about. Secondly, he personalized a lot of it. There was a lot of stories where he talked about his parents, you know, being son of immigrants and coming to Ontario and just building a life for his family. That was important. I think that is what he's going to be, translating over the next 30 plus days in this campaign, but it's going to be about jobs, and that I think is going to be the ballot question.
When people talk about the Ring of Fire, what are they talking about? And I don't mean the Johnny Cash song.
Well, it's a remarkable deposit of minerals, nickel, platinum, palladium, but very much strongly chromite, which is the one that has people most excited. About 540 kilometers northwest of Thunder Bay. It's about 1,900 square kilometers. Kind of a crescent shape, which is really, I think, where the like a ring, which is where it began in terms of the Ring of Fire, a reference, and one of the early developers, like Johnny Cash, so it became the Ring of Fire. But it is a remarkable $60 billion deposit of minerals, clearly in a remote part of the province that in a part of the province that's had no development before, which is why we're working so hard to make sure that while the excitement related to jobs and opportunities are certainly there, and we're working hard to make that happen, we've got to make sure we do it right.
Have you ever been there?
Yes, I've been there a number of times. I've certainly been up to all of the communities, certainly that are in the Ring of Fire. There are a number of communities that are directly impacted by the Ring of Fire, and closely to the site of the deposit and where most of the development will take place. So I've been to many of the communities on a number of occasions.
Vic Fideli, what's there?
Well, I have actually been in the camp 4 different occasions now in my career, and before I was an MPP. And what's there today is a little different than what was there 4 years ago. 4 years ago was a vibrant community with several hundred people working. One of the camps had about 125 people. They were drilling, they were delineating their ore body is what it's called. So they're drilling all around, trying to get an understanding of what's underground. About 500 yards away was another base camp that I visited, and they had more than 100 employees, and they too were delineating their ore body. Very hard to get there, a lot easier in the winter than in the summer. I was there this winter, and sadly, there are less than a dozen people left working there today.
And Gilles Bisson, there are fewer than a dozen people there today because why?
Well, I think the government's kind of missed the boat here. This is not just about building a chromite mine in the Ring of Fire. This is about creating a stainless steel industry for Ontario. As you know, we as a party have long advocated that you have to have a bit of a carrot-stick approach. Assist the companies to develop the infrastructure necessary, do the training, deal with revenue sharing and land use plannings, those issues that are important to make sure that the First Nations are made whole when it comes to this project. But position it in such a way that you're also able to develop stainless steel. And what's happened is that we've seen over 7 years now announcements from the government, both in the throne speech and within budget, saying Ring of Fire, it's coming, it's coming. But essentially, we've frustrated the players so much so that Cliff Resources has pretty well put it on hold for now because they feel that they've been frustrated by the process. The government's really never known exactly what it is that they got to do to get this going, and it's not complicated. You've got to deal with First Nations, provide revenue sharing from the existing resources. You've got to deal effectively with training so that you can train up the people necessary that are going to work there. You've got to be able to develop the infrastructure, each put up our third federal, provincial, and the companies themselves. And in exchange for doing that, you position it for stainless steel. And this would be a great opportunity for Ontario if we actually process the ore here in Ontario, something the Democrats are committed to do.
John Northey, let me ask you, why do you think there's so little activity going on up there right now?
Well, there's an assortment of reasons for why there would be so little activity at this time. A large part of the reason is the agreements with the First Nations have just recently been put in place, which I do give credit to the Liberals for finally getting those into place, because that is critical. Last thing we need is to have any issues after things get going. Other issues are that it is a nightmare to get roads and rail up there. As somebody who lives up here, I've seen the wilderness up here, and it is a challenge to get through it.
We know what we're going to discuss. We know that we need to deal with the question of environmental assessment to make sure First Nations are properly consulted with respect to the impacts on the environment of future development. We know the province has agreed to discuss infrastructure. The province has made on its own, has made several announcements about infrastructure, and we look forward to discussing those announcements with the province, but we also want to say, look, you know, we don't think the infrastructure should only be there for the mining companies. We think the infrastructure has to be there for communities that have not had decent infrastructure. 5 of the communities that I represent have no roads to get to. There's no all-season road to get into.
Got to fly in?
You fly in, and there's a winter road that connects the communities, but this past winter is the first winter in a while that we've had really good roads that have allowed communities to connect. And the province has to make some really serious decisions about how it wants to proceed with respect to all of the communities that are without access to road and without access to communication. Many of the communities have no effective broadband communication, so they're not able to connect digitally to the rest of the world, the rest of the province. So there's a lot of issues that are on the table. The conditions on reserve remain very troublesome, and the communities have never benefited economically directly from the revenue flow that the province gets as a result of this development. Every time I see a politician, my former profession, but I see them talk about the Ring of Fire, one of the first things they talk about is how much revenue will flow to the province. Well, there's a real question there. What about some of the revenue flowing to the First Nations? And the first time ever that the First Nations are putting that on the table. First time, it's not the first time it's been put on the table, the first time the province has said, okay, we'll discuss this, we'll negotiate this. And that is a really, I think, very, very important breakthrough.
When you do your negotiating, is it just you and Frankie Akabuchi in a room?
No. It's I mean, sometimes yes, there are conversations that the two of us have as negotiators, but no, we've had lots of meetings with the whole group. We've had lots of meetings with smaller groups. We meet with government officials. I mean, it's ironic because I know the government of Ontario's structure very well. I know the officials, many of them I've known, many of them worked for me when I was Premier. And I know them extremely well. And I know the various, I wouldn't say divisions, but the points of view within the government, within the, not politically, not between different political parties, but between different ministries that have a different perspective on how things have unfolded in the past and how they should unfold in the future. On the other hand, Frank talks directly to all of the 9 communities that I represent. And the government of Ontario is talking all the time to individual communities about projects and needs that they have. So it's not an entirely adversarial process in its nature, because both of us as negotiators know quite a lot about what's going on the other side, and that's not a bad thing as long as you respect each other and say, well, you know, I've heard this, and I say, well, I've heard that, so you know, let's talk that through.
If you look at provincial election turnout for the past 20 years, you see a steady decline, consistent with the federal elections as well. The 2 outliers to that are the recent Quebec election and the recent Alberta election. And if you look at both, there was an important issue. There was the education issue in Quebec, and there's the oil sands development in Alberta. So I feel, point 1, there isn't really an issue this time around that I think is really going to get Ontarians out in droves. Number 2, I think Ontario has a different sort of participatory culture than these other provinces.
Meaning what?
Meaning we don't sort of see Ontarians get really angry about something. Like, look at what British Columbians did with the HST. They mobilized a Facebook group, you know, they protested, and now they don't have HST as a consequence of their political participation. We don't see that kind of thing happening in Ontario the same way we see it happening in Quebec and British Columbia.
Do you see that as well?
I do, and look, I agree. We're not an engaged province. I disagree with the point that there's not anything to compel. As I said before, I think there's lots to compel voters in theory in this election. Look, not just with the issues they're running on, but this is a province with a big deficit, with a lot of real economic challenges, with some very uncertain future for its social programs. There's a lot of real issues there, and there are some real alternatives being offered by different parties. The problem is I don't think we're a very engaged province. I think in Ontario, provincial politics here in particular, it kind of slips through the cracks. I mean, we talk about federal politics. We don't have a particularly strong provincial identity. We are obsessed with municipal politics in the Toronto area right now for obvious reasons. And it's very hard to get people just motivated. Believe me, as a provincial columnist, it's very hard to get people talking as much as you would like about Ontario politics.
Do they read your stuff, Adam? Do you know?
Well, the smart ones do. But
the smart ones do, of course.
No, and I'm joking about the smart ones, but there's an engaged core that absolutely will seek out, you know, opinion and columns and so on, and great. But broadly, there's just not the same level of engagement that you get in other places. I just don't think people self-identify as Ontarians quite the same way they do elsewhere, and they sort of write off how Ontario politics is boring and it doesn't have the color of the other levels and so on.
Except that that's not true.
It's not true right now at all. You know, last election, as I said, I think unfortunately the parties may have proved them right a little bit on that. This time they're not. It would be nice to see people kind of get past that idea of it.
Let's play some tape, and then Dave, I'll get you to comment on this tape first. We have done, for many weeks in a row now, sort of a, let's put the microscope on democracy. And here's a clip of one of our previous segments, and we'll get you to comment after this. Roll tape, please.
You can't really tell what politicians care about. You know what I mean? They all look the same, they all talk the same.
The dialogue is so simplistic that you see in the House of Commons.
It's the talking points. Because I'm there often and I hear the same thing over and over and over and over again.
Slogans turn me off so much. The distilling of a complex, subtle idea to a phrase, it just makes me not want to be a part of it.
It's jargon to me. It's very, very hard to slice through. It's completely frustrating.
People need to let politicians say something that's not in a 30-second soundbite, that doesn't have a message plastered behind them every time they go out in public to speak.
I can't even think of a politician in my lifetime who said, I don't know what to do about this. But I hear that from scientists all the time. I hear that from business people. I hear that from entrepreneurs.
It would be wonderful if they could share their subtlety with us in a way that they don't seem inclined to do right now because of the current political climate.
We have one group of people who have expectations of what to hear. We have another group of people who are speaking, it appears, a completely different language. Do you see any middle ground here at all?
I think what would help is if we had more choice. So in a world where everything is driven by increasing choice all the time, compare how many stations were on the punch box on TV when we grew up to what there is now.
Right.
So kids are growing up with thousands of things to watch anytime on their phone. Anything you want to buy, it's choice, choice, choice. And then it's election time, and it's, in the US, red or blue, and here we throw in a green and an orange. Well, just an orange. The greens, that's too much. A fourth choice, we can't handle that.
We do it here.
We actually, TVO, to your credit, is the only media outlet that does it consistently, which is great. But I think it would really help if people felt there was more choice. The three major parties, they're not it's silly to say they're the same or they're all saying the same thing, but they do gravitate towards the middle. They are risk averse, and they're more likely to use cheap slogans than to take risks and to say what they really believe. And I think that just as in the free market, in the capitalist world, it's the startups and the small companies that are edgy and push the big guys to make, innovations. We need small parties to have a voice. And I think it's only a democracy committed to mediocrity would exclude the Green Party the way they're doing right now, knowing that they appeal to youth as well more than any other party. Mike Schreiner should be in the debates. And I support voting reform. When we talk about voting reform, we usually do it in the context of the math. They got this many votes, but not as many seats. That's not fair. It also affects who runs, how they run against each other, and I think it would increase voter turnout as well. So for example, the Green Party, they got 8% of the vote in 2007. They should have had, 9 or 10 seats at Queen's Park.
That's a different show, man.
I know it's a different show, but I mean, we can't talk about apathy without talking about the fact that we have a voting system that encourages apathy by pushing everyone towards the center and not giving us who we ask for.
Do you think that's fair, that because we don't have proportional representation and therefore some people will allege not every vote counts the same as it in a first-past-the-post system, that suppresses the vote?
I think there's a bit of a problem. Look, I live in Toronto Danforth. I can tell you that in Toronto, I can tell you right now who's going to win Toronto Danforth. Anybody who lives there, who pays any attention, can tell you who's going to win. That probably doesn't help in terms of making people feel their vote counts. And on Dave, I know Dave has been advocating hard for ranked balloting, which would, I think, maybe compel the parties to at least try to speak to a broader audience, because they'd have to try and get 50% of the population to at least be okay with them, which would mean a bit of a broader message.
They'd get a first place and second place.
That's right, as opposed to trying to narrow target and say, well, we only need 35%, so let's just talk to them. Just on the clip there, I do think there's a bit of a vicious circle there. I mean, you've got people complaining that the politicians only speak in sound bites and in slogans. And you've got the politicians saying, well, that's the only way that anybody's going to hear us, because they're not paying any attention. I mean, you've probably heard Tim Hudaks say before that, just when you get tired of saying something is when people start actually hearing it. So it kind of feeds into itself. I don't know how you break that, but it is kind of a two-way street.
What did you see in that clip that either gave you some hope or more likely some despair about solving this?
I think that, like I said before, parties try and sell themselves. So if it works for corporations to brand themselves and have their messaging, right, sell their brand, why wouldn't it work for parties? I think increasingly in the past, 10, 15 years, we've seen parties really brand themselves and come into electioneering machines that try and sell their brand.
If we're talking about re-engaging the disengaged, how about by law you have to vote? Is that an option?
I don't support that. For a few reasons. First of all, I don't think it should be an obligation. And I think teaching it as an obligation and a duty actually sends the wrong message. The truth is, it's in your interest to participate in shaping the world around you, whether it's through being on your residents association or part of a nonprofit or voting. I think that's a more appealing message. The other thing is, it's a really important metric for us to have to see voter turnout, to be able to compare Quebec to Ontario. Forcing everyone to vote means we actually lose the ability to see if our democracy is functioning. I want to know if people want to vote, and I want them to want to vote.
20 seconds, Adam.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't support it either. I mean, look, I wish more people were engaged, but when you've got less than half people voting, and look, we've all talked to people out there about their level of engagement here, I'm not sure they'd be that much more engaged, and I really don't like the idea of people not paying any attention, just going and voting randomly for whichever party.
Why have we apparently been talking about this issue for so long and so intensely lately? Opening up the beer sales.
Well, I think Tim Hudak from the Progressive Conservative Party led us to believe that he was serious about liberalizing the sale of beer in this province and opening up what he described as choice, as a conservative, as a Tory. Liberalizing beer sales, by the way, does not mean privatizing the beer store, because as we've said, it's actually already privately held. So I think with the expectation coming, I think the beer store in particular was expecting this to happen, and they launched an advertising campaign that got a fair bit of attention that basically went on the attack, if I can call it that, against convenience stores and said, here's the peril of allowing corner stores to sell beer or other alcohol. You will have underage drinking sales. And that, I think, had a bit of a backlash.
Okay, let's go around our literal and metaphorical table here and just get everybody to state their positions, and then we'll go on from there. Dr. Pellizzari, let me start with you. Yes or no to more liberalizing of the sale of beer beyond the beer store?
Well, I'm shaking my head. No, definitely not. I guess the best, we've looked at the evidence, and we know that the best way to control consumption and reduce harm is to, use taxation as a way to regulate demand, to control access, and then also to restrict advertising. So controlling access works. And we have lots of examples, both here in Canada and globally, where privatization or increasing the density of outlets where alcohol can be purchased both on-premise and off-premise leads to increased harms from alcohol, increased consumption, increased violence, crime activity, suicides, injuries, you name it.
Okay, let's go to Dave Bryans. You're here representing convenience stores. What's your position?
Definitely, yes. We know that Ontarians want to be treated like millions of other Canadians, where they have access to, 12 cold beers on a hot summer day, or a bottle of wine if company drops over Sunday night for dinner. So we think it's time to open the market and make it more accessible to everybody. And I think, a mature society as Ontario has become today, our customers are telling us that it's time that they want to be treated as mature voters in Ontario and mature customers.
Jeff Newton, you're here representing Orange and White.
Yep.
Okay, what's your position?
Steve, we think we've got a great system. We're very proud of it. We're proud of the work that our 7,000 employees do across the province. It's a unique system, no doubt, but it's a system that is unique in the sense that it's completely open. While people call it a monopoly, it is not a monopoly. It is more of a beer commons in the sense that every brewer is allowed to get into the system, be it a small brewer, a large brewer, and regardless of whether you're a small craft brewer from another country, you can be in our system and pick the stores you want to put your products in and put in as many products to as many stores as you want. And when you're in there, you're allowed to set your own price. So that creates a very competitive environment. Our prices are actually down 11% over the last decade. So the big question here...
Is that relative to inflation or
adjusted to inflation over the last 10 years, you pay less today, 11% less than you did in 2003. That's a result of the efficiencies of that system. So the big question as we see it is if you want to change that system and you want to go to a system of corner and gas station retailing, you're going to proliferate the number of outlets that are selling. You're going to have 10, 15,000 outlets that are going to sell alcohol in this province, and the cost of retailing is going to go up. The cost of distribution of getting beer from a brewery into the hands of a consumer is going to go up. All of those costs are going to pass through into the price of beer.
Tim Hudak has been saying essentially for the last couple of years, if he gets in, he will do something with the LCBO, privatize it, take it out of government hands. He confirmed yesterday that's now a back burner position. Why the change, do you think?
Well, I'm not in Tim Hudak's head or in his confidence anymore, so I can't say. But I suspect that his team decided that it was a fairly populist discussion, and that it was best left as something to do after they get elected, if indeed they do get elected. I'm here because I worked that file for a very long time and was there when the discussion with Tim was, do we do this or do we not do this in terms of going forward with a platform? And I guess we now know the decision. My view was that it was a good piece to bring in, and that it still is.
Greg Sobera, we wanted you here because, a couple of reasons actually. You're a former consumer minister from 25 years ago or so. You also, I think when you were finance minister, ordered a task force to look into whether or not you should do something with the LCBO.
Yep, one of the first things.
So what do you think you should do?
Well, the fact is that most people in Ontario are quite happy with the way in which we sell beverage alcohol.
How do you know that?
Well, we know that because polling year after year after year indicates a very high level of satisfaction. Privatization of the LCBO has a lot of advocates, but it would give rise to two things. First of all, it would have people in the retail part of the business selling it at much lower wages. Is it a good thing to have people's wages go down? And secondly, it would probably, likely enhance availability. Let's have it in the grocery stores. Let's have separate liquor stores. And there's not a real appetite in Ontario for forcing people who have well-paying jobs with good pensions to start working at $12 and $13 an hour. And there's not a real lot of appetite for people to say, you know what, I need to be able to buy a bottle of gin someplace at 4 o'clock in the morning. That's not really important to the people of the province.
Howard Hampton, when you were in power, did you look at this?
No.
Do you think anything should be done about it?
No, I think it works quite well. I mean, let's face it, a government today that is hard-pressed to find cash gets about $2.3 billion a year from the LCBO.
That's profits and taxes.
That's profit, taxes, excise fees. That's a pretty good chunk of change when you're trying to pay for the public services we need. Secondly, as somebody who doesn't come from the big city, I can tell you that growing up in a small town, all right, where at my age, drinking underage was the rage, right? The LCBO operated a very, very responsible outfit. Everybody who boasted about, hey, I'm 17 and I got booze on the weekend, well, you sure didn't get it from the LCBO. You got challenged as soon as you went in the door. In a small town, they look at you and say, I know your dad, right? On all sorts of fronts, the LCBO operates well. It gets tremendous prices from the companies that it purchases from because it's one of the largest operators in the world.
I think it's the biggest purchaser of booze in the world.
It is. So they get tremendous economies of scale, tremendous efficiency. And now, growing up a little older, when I'm at home, I know I can go to the LCBO, and if I want a certain kind of Canadian wine or French wine, I merely have to tell the LCBO, and they'll get it.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, or on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.